for August 2023. Tonight's session will be on the state of the trade union movement in Ukraine.
This class is extremely important in teaching everyone about the trade union movement and really one of the focal points of the Maidan coup, which led to the fascists taking over in Ukraine, which was at the House of Trade Unions in Odessa, which we're going to learn more about later in the lesson. But one of the key things about fascists is that they attack the trade union movement. They make it illegal. They make the unions themselves difficult to manage, either through laws or through making it financially difficult. And we're going to see kind of how the laws in Ukraine have been drafted and enacted in a way that really threatens not only the livelihoods of Ukrainians, but every single win that the working class managed to attain throughout the entire history of the labor movement there. It's really terrible, but this class is extremely important in bringing awareness to that.
So this class is going to have three main sections. We're going to talk about the 2014 Maidan coup and the involvement of the AFL-CIO. Then we're going to go into the attacks on the trade union movement with a focus on the House of Trade Unions Massacre in Odessa in 2014. And then our last section will be on the laws passed and in progress on trade union rights in Ukraine. All right, so the role of the AFL-CIO in the Maidan coup. The AFL-CIO, since at least the McCarthyite period, has acted as an asset of the Central Intelligence Agency in attacking all class-oriented trade unions internationally. Even before the merger, due to the McCarthyite takeover of the CIO, acting in coordination with the CIA, the CIO led a split in the World Federation of Trade Unions, WFTO. Through CIA-funded institutions, most notably the Solidarity Center, the AFL-CIO helps in carrying out the quote-unquote foreign policy aims of American capitalists. Two glaring examples are assisting the neo-fascist overthrow of Salvador Allende by Pinochet in Chile in 1973, and the Solidarność movement, well, in English, Solidarity movement in Poland in the 1980s, which is largely credited with leading to the overthrow of the government in Poland there. With the CIA-funded union linked to far-right parties and responsible for privatization of Poland's economy. Fast forward to the Maidan protest of 2014, the insidious role of the AFL-CIO in propping up U.S. imperialism was in full effect. The AFL-CIO involvement in Maidan was carried out through intermediary and American Federation of Teachers president Randy Weingarten, who went to Ukraine and met with Mikhail Volynets, chairman of the so-called Free Trade Unions of Ukraine, the KVPU. He is a known asset of the CIA and AFL-CIO-run Solidarity Center. Volynets and the KVPU, which has documented ties to fascist militias, most notably the Azov Battalion, were part of a supposed all-Ukrainian strike in favor of Maidan. However, it was revealed that this strike was not supported by the actual working class of Ukraine, unable to get support from rank-and-file members. Volynets dressed office staff as miners to make it appear there was support because he couldn't get the actual miners to show up on the strike lines. In Western Ukraine, the strike appeared to be a huge success. Unfortunately, chairman of then dissenting union, Zakis Pratsy, in English labor defense, Oleg Vernik, exposed the reality of the strike. And I just want to give a quick addendum here. Oleg Vernik and the Zakis Pratsy union has since fallen in line with the fascist government of Ukraine. In an article entitled "All Ukrainian Strike as a Big Fake of Euromaidan," Vernik documented the reality of the strike. And here I'm quoting from the article. Ordered by the directors of the enterprises, workers were forced to abandon their lunches and gather for 1 hour in front of the main entrances to their factories to express their hearty support for the opposition leaders. A clip about this quote-unquote lunch strike in a linen factory in Rovno was on constant rotation on TV Channel 5, which belongs to the opposition-affiliated oligarch Peter Poroshenko. Its participants later openly admitted that their quote-unquote strike was ordered by the factory's director, and this was the scenario for all of the enterprises which were announced as having joined the quote-unquote all-Ukrainian strike. This all-Ukrainian strike was a key in building support from Western labor for the Maidan protest and the eventual coup. And as we can all see, it was a farce. Okay, we'll break for some quick questions, and then we're going to go into part two.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot of this. I knew all about what happened in Poland in 1980 with Solidarność. And it seems like they followed the same script years later in the Ukraine. And we need to get some kind of documentation of this so that we could send it out to people. I think Labor Today should have an article documented on what you just said. This whole thing. It needs to be exposed. The fact that I didn't even know about it, and I know a lot about this stuff, and I didn't know anything about that, says that other people don't know. Thank you.
I knew about the McCarthyite takeover of the CIO, but I didn't know that the CIA, I guess they orchestrated a split in the WFTU.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
you could elaborate on that. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, that's how what is currently known as the International Trade Union Confederation, or ITUC, was formed. Their name was different then. It was, I forget what the exact name was at
International
that time.
Federation of Free Trade Unions.
There you go.
That was the old name.
Yeah, so the CIO was actually a founding member of the WFTU, but it was never able to actually officially affiliate with the WFTU, but it was involved in setting up the WFTU. It was also a big proponent of sending support, material and financial, to the Soviet Union immediately after World War II. But right after World War II, the State Department worked with right-wing factions within the CIO to expel communist unions. And specifically, they expelled the UE, the largest union in the CIO. It had over 600,000 members. So there was a coordinated attack by the State Department of the US against the CIO, which led to the split of American labor from the rest of the world, basically.
If there's no more questions or comments, we'll go back to the second part. And with the second part, we're just going to be a brief presentation on slides, and then there's going to be a couple of videos. And I'm going to give a warning now. The videos are graphic. Attack on trade unions and working people. Due to the fascist nature of the Coup regime, several regions within Ukraine declared themselves people's republics. The Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics have maintained their existence fighting since 2014, and those are the most well known. In fact, the real mine is supposedly represented in the strike, which were part of the resistance that led to the formation of those republics. A third, little known People's Republic was formed, and it was the Odessa People's Republic. Odessa's resistance is said to have simply, quote unquote, died down, according to Western discourse. However, Odessa's resistance was violently stopped. On May 2nd, and I'm sorry, the date is wrong, it's 2014, at least 50 people were barbarically murdered at the House of Trade Unions in Odessa by fascist mobs, backed by the state and aided by the police. We will review some video clips on this incident. And once again, the warning, these clips are graphic. And all these clips are from part 6 of a documentary series on the so-called Ukrainian Revolution, called Roses Have Thorns.
Кто там внутри? Внутри Мaidan, да? Да, это кто? Правый сектор. Вот это правый сектор? Да, что, 30 человек приехали сегодня, типа ультрас футбольные. Он все-таки остается. Очень свет, блин. Долбоёб! Оттаскивай его, оттаскивай! Оттаскивай! Все видят, я все видел, у него все под контролем. Правильно, Самар? Да? Все отлично, да? Правильно? Все хорошо. Этого ждали. Вы лично несете, лично вы, а не своим бездействием и халатным отношением, своим выполнением своих обязанностей прямых. Нравится вам это? вот эти стороны, с этой стороны, тут наши большинство стороны людей. Дали и не пускали, какие не жарко. Ну, я сделаю. Что мне здесь понимать? Ладно, давай не забудь. Ну, хоть хоть что закинем. Вот. Правильно, дайте взгляд. Она победит попала. Ой. Ребята прыгает с окон, спасается от пожара, прыгает с окон. Три сколько убитых. Пошел. Кто там внутри?
And if you noticed on the guy that was shooting into the building, the armband, it might just look like the regular Ukrainian flag, but in World War II, the Nazi collaborators in Ukraine wore the exact same armband when they were carrying out their massacres of Jewish people in the Ukraine. And there's one more video from the House of Trade Unions massacre. Another video with an interview from someone that was inside.
Последняя встреча, помните, да, как у нас был?
Она произошла минут за 20 до подхода правосеков или бандерлогов, или фашистов, как их можно по-другому назвать, это все наемники, это никакие не фанаты, туристы или футболисты. Это чисто были проплаченные бандиты. Многие из них были подготовлены, были со стрелковым оружием, с ракетницами, несли сразу с собой коктейли Молотова, камни различные, потому что они тут же начали кидать по людям, которые не успели войти в помещение. Начали по нам стрелять и сразу сжигать со всех сторон. Подошли со всех направлений почти одновременно. Они сразу забросали какими-то веществами пахучими. Такое впечатление, что какой-то газ был. Люди сразу стали задыхаться. У меня просто больное горло, я поэтому сразу побежал выше. А те, кто пытался, как говорится, перетерпеть, они фактически задохнулись. На всех 4 этажах лежали люди, задохнувшиеся от газа. Пришлось переместиться он на соседнее крыло вниз. Там был меньше дым. Проняли ударную лестницу, чтобы никто туда не пробрался. Там просидели до темноты. Фактически подошел один взвод милиции и встали метров 40 от здания, опустили головы и ни шагу не сделали вперед. Все эти бандиты стояли у здания, стреляли, забрасывали бутылками и убивали людей прямо на земле, которые выпадали из окон и прыгали. Просто добивали. Я им по мегафону, вот поэтому 3 часа отдавал команды, говорю, подойдите, спасите людей. Никто не подходил. По мне тоже там пытались стрелять и светить на меня этими указками лазерными, вычисляли меня все. Говорили, подполковник, мы вас порвем здесь на части. Милиция внутрь не заходила. Она плотным кольцом оцепила одно здание, по второму периметру, по второму стало. Второе кольцо милиции, наверное, не пускали людей. А всех этих бандитов где-то часов, я не знаю, ну они, может, раньше зашли, но часов 10 основная масса уехала, а бандиты именно, которые добивали, они вошли в здание, и там постоянно были слышны выстрелы, кричали там крики типа, вот еще одна дверь, взламываемая, там есть живые люди, и там звучало очень много выстрелов. Мы находились в другом помещении, там железная дверь, они просто не смогли ее, видно, взломать, а через крышу боялись лезть, потому что у нас на всех лестницах стояли люди с лопатами, там, ну, что было под руками, просто выбрасывали бы и не убивали. Потом договорились с милицией, что нас не будут пропускать через толпу, как те, которые выскакивали с нижних более этажей. Они их всех пытались на колени ставить, ранее добивали, никакой медицинской помощи не разрешали им оказывать. скорой помощи не подъезжали. Там они их фактически добивали, кого не добили, забрасывали в автозаки.
А людей...
Потом где-то в 4:15 они вывели где-то последние 45 человек, но я не видел. Я тоже от холода уже залез внутрь. В 10:40 я кое-как дозвонился до милиционера подполковника одного и попросил, чтобы он нас вывел, потому что я не доверял милиции. Они бы нас могли не довести, мы последние свидетели были. И он уже прислал специально 2 милиционеров подполковника, и они нас 5 вывели через главный вход в 10:50. По дороге я поднял веточку из одного трупа. Там случайно трупы лежали, баллистицы, горелые. Вот готовили шланг, и он лежал уже. Но как только начали открывать кран, а там даже не пчепило. Ее перекрыли заранее. Воду перекрыли заранее. Одна машина пожарная приехала без воды. То есть 180 метров до пожарной команды. Они не приехали, где-то через час появились, просто проимитировали. Милиция тоже там целый час стала в стороне и просто помогала творить им свое... Ну, я не знаю даже, как слова подбирать.
Это показатель.
Все было умышленно сделано.
Да,
Мы просто думали, как, ну, прибегут, в крайнем случае, там пошвыряют, покидают, попытаются там сжечь палатки и уйдут. Милиция нас будет, как говорится, оттеснит и не даст ворваться в здание. А у них была задача нас убить любыми путями. И даже если бы мы не вошли в здание, они бы догоняли бы, убивали бы по кустам. Ну, потом они пытались лезть по веревкам, а в них стреляли прицельно с пистолетов, им все докладывали куда-то своим шефам в Киев. Можете посмотреть в интернете. Все снято. Задокументировано. Они как на протокол, даже лица свои не прячут. И мы стояли до конца. И я вышел последний. И пусть они там 4 часа кричали, здесь победа, когда 45 человек вышли, они думали, что уже никого нет. Но там оставались 5 человек. И значит, они проиграли. Но победа будет следующая за нами.
And attacks on the trade unions continue. The attacks on trade unions and trade union rights have not been just against leaders in Ukraine. The fascist government in Ukraine had in 2016 levied charges against Pier Paolo Leonardi, General Secretary of the UBS Union in Italy, and General Secretary of the Trade Union International of Public Services and Allied Trades, an affiliate of the World Federation of Trade Unions, for quote-unquote illegal entry into the Donbass region. Leonardi was on a mission from the World Federation of Trade Unions, supporting the working class and people of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. Due to the censorship of information coming from the area by the U.S. capitalist media at the behest of the U.S. State Department, we have been unable to determine the outcome of these charges. I will break for questions and comments.
I was just curious, were the armed forces of Ukraine under the loyalty of the fascist regime by this point, or because I'm just noticing that they are completely absent from all of this. Were they already on the side of the fascists by this point?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
As you can see in that first video, the cops basically just sat idly by and watched as the whole thing went down. And if you saw in that interview, that gentleman was basically said that they assisted them. So, and they wouldn't let regular people through, but they let them through. So, I don't know the exact answer. I don't know if anybody else has the answer to that, but it would not shock me if they were. All right, if there's no more questions or comments, we'll go to the third part of the presentation. Part 3. The laws passed or in progress on trade union rights. Legal attacks by the Ukrainian government. Labor rights have been under attack in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Maidan coup, and specifically since Volodymyr Zelensky came to power, have brought an intensification of the attacks on the trade unions. Since the 1990s, the Ukrainian government has tried to strip the Federation of Trade Unions, or the FPU, of their property, which is holdovers from the Soviet system, in which trade unions operated many facilities, giving workers access to a vacation and some recreation, which is mostly unattainable to American workers due to high costs. Starting in 2020, after Zelensky took over power, these attacks and many others on labor rights have been intensified. In 2020, draft law number 2681 was brought up for consideration. It includes the following quote unquote reforms. That's how they label it. Restricting the ability of people to join trade unions. The aforementioned seizure of trade union property. Implementing an increased bureaucracy that is to quote oversee union activities and revoke abilities of trade union CBAs for quote unquote managerial staff. Currently, this bill, as well as another bill, draft number 6420, aimed solely at seizing the property of trade unions, are still pending in the Verkhovna Rada, their parliament. But since last year, using Russia's defense of the besieged Donbass republics as cover, the Verkhovna Rada and Zelensky have passed several laws violating the rights of trade unions and their members. In July 22, two laws were passed and then ratified. One was stripping away the rights for workers to called on to fight the quote-unquote Russian invasion. And this law is only applicable while martial law is in effect. A second, this law is permanent law allowing 0-hour contracts, meaning workers under this kind of contract are not guaranteed any hours at all. In August 2002, Draft Law 5371 was ratified Zelensky. And this one was a doozy. This law stripped workers in small and medium-sized businesses of collective bargaining rights. And this accounts for 70% of all Ukrainian workers. And now when this bill was passed by the Verkhovna Rada, it was originally set to be a permanent bill that would never go out of effect. But Zelensky, and it was originally reported that Zelensky vetoed this bill. However, he signed a letter implementing it for as long as martial law is in effect. And in May 2023 of this year, the Verkhovna Rada introduced Draft Law 8244, which would strip away union representation rights if a company was to fall under new ownership. And to put into context, these laws that are supposedly only in effect under martial law. Martial law, just last week, martial law was extended in Ukraine for the 8th time, keeping the quote-unquote temporary labor rights restrictions in place through at least November. And I don't see them removing martial law anytime soon. And that was it for this presentation. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, on that law 8244 about union representation being lost if it's sold to a new owner. I mean, with this, is it fair to assume that this is in conjunction with the kind of mass privatization that's been going on in Ukraine? Because if I remember right, there is a lot of, I don't know if it's property or companies, but there's a lot of stuff that's being like bought up by BlackRock and other American companies. So is it safe to assume that those are basically in conjunction and it's planned that way? It's planned that American companies will buy these companies, and then because this law is in effect, it will strip the unions. Is that kind of correct?
That's my understanding of it.
Okay.
I know the KVPU, has been the ones fighting these laws and yet they're the ones that basically worked to work to for the coup to uh and it's by coming back to bite them in the ass as it always does when you work to support U.S. imperialism in your country.
Thank you. So this is all pretty doom and gloom, and understandably so, because it's a pretty tough subject. But I'm wondering if does anybody know anything about like basically like the conditions of liberated areas that Russia has taken care of? I saw one post or something that said that they like paved a road that hadn't been repaved in like 30 years or something like that. Or does anybody know about how things are going in the liberated areas?
The little bits I've been able to find, the unions is still pretty strong. They are class-oriented unions like we are, like we push.
I mean, they are in a stronger position than in Ukraine. Their property that they have in the eastern in Donbass isn't being taken away from them and then sold to investors across the world. I think what I was asking about was more to infrastructure and what Russia's doing to maintain it. I know that they've rebuilt the Kerch Bridge twice now. So I don't know if that was the right name for it, but there's definitely a lot of, I think it's the army, the armed forces in Russia that are doing a lot of the construction work in the Donbass. But that's about it. That's all I know.
And keep in mind, these unions may be in a stronger position than in Ukraine proper now, but they're still under siege. That's never stopped in the Donbass regions.
Hearing about what the trade unions under the fascist regime have become, it is pretty similar to in Nazi Germany, the German Labor Front, which was a Nazi party controlled. I don't know if you actually call it a union, because it banned collective bargaining, and it basically delegated the role of labor relations by Nazi appointed leaders. But it does seem they at least tried to, they learned from history a little bit and tried to make it appear to be more democratic than in the past. It's very shallow, but you can see that they tried to put up this facade that there's still rights, even though they're effectively negligent. So maybe at least to the international community.
Yeah, that's a ploy they've done. Usually any union that calls himself a free trade union is usually associated in some way with the Solidarity Center, and they're usually the exact opposite of free.
It was my understanding, I can't remember which of the People's Republics it was, Donetsk or Lugansk, but I believe one of the republics, their president is in charge of a national labor union or a republic labor union. Is that true? I can't remember their names.
I don't know if it's the president, if he's the president, but I know Andrei Kochekov, who was the lead president of the trade unions in Lugansk, did get a high position up in their government. I don't remember the exact position.
Instrumental to the fascist takeover of Ukraine was the role that Trotskyists and other elements, social democrats, that they played in confusing people and leading them to support of a fascist government. These elements really throw a wrench into the initial rejection of fascists by the working class, and they, by hook or crook, try and gain leadership positions over the labor movement to tie the labor movement to these fascists. And it's not always right wing, sometimes it's left wing elements that do this. And in Ukraine, that we saw it happen. But it also happened in the Weimar Republic, and then they killed Rosa Luxemburg. But it also happened here. There were the Trotskyists and the ultra lefts here in the AFL, which sided with the bosses and were spies, sabotage strikes, tried to sabotage the CIO. Those are all elements that Lowell is trying to fight against, trying to prevent those type of people from swindling their way into positions of leadership and leading us down a path that is deadly. So that's a very important. What happened in Ukraine is a very important reminder that this isn't just a theory. This isn't abstract. This is concrete, and it has a disastrous consequence when these people are left unchecked, and when militant trade unionists are unable to organize and win over the working class.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering if anybody knew, like, what do they promise those right sector people? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, why they would want to kill the people, the trade unionists, because it seems to me like they would kind of be of the same class and ilk. I just wonder if anybody knew.
Well, right sector in particular, their flag is the top is red and the bottom is black. That's blood and soil. So right off the bat, the slogan, that the term there is fascist. There's an innate anti-communist ideology in right sector, and they consider the trade unions to be communists. And of course, we've all heard what the accusations from not only Ukraine, but to some respect, the criticisms that Putin had of the Soviet Union are held to be 100% true by right sector. that the Bolsheviks were to blame, that they suppressed Ukrainian nationalities. So they view the trade union movement in Ukraine as being Russian, Bolshevik, communist. So they had no intention of ever trying to negotiate with people that they considered to be enemies of the Bandera legacy, basically. I think that that's probably, I don't know to what extent it's true, but I definitely would say that they consider trade unionism to be anyone who's in a trade union to be a communist.
To bring this, I guess, to the U.S. a little bit. Now, when the U.S. Congress and the executive branch cracked down on the railway strikes, was this, a glimpse at how this begins? How labor collective bargaining gets crushed under fascism, or is this completely different for us? If that makes sense.
Well, under fascism, what happens is that the unions are basically stripped of any rights at all. They become shells, and in some cases, they become company unions. So their only purpose is specifically for labor management, like in Nazi Germany. I don't think Ukraine today could be so blatant about it. So what they do is they don't outright make unions illegal. They just make it impossible to be a part of one. And then they also try to steal all the property and of the unions.
I was just kind of curious, what was going on with the railway unions. What's different about those, and do they really have any rights if their labor contracts are being imposed on them by the Congress and the president?
Briefly, I'll be very brief. The Foster was always against any type of work between the government and the unions. He was very much against mediation. Of course, he was against what happened to the railway unions. They have almost no recourse against the government at this point. But I would say that the government can't, like in Ukraine, government can't outright make them illegal. So they go through other ways to limit the power of the unions.
With that, we'll close it out. Once again, you can follow Labor United Educational League on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. On Twitter, or I guess we could call it now X. But it's at Lowell_US. On Instagram, it's Lowell.US. And on Facebook, you can find us at LaborUnited.Lowell. And you can follow us, of course, Lowell. You can find the website at www.lowell.us. And you can find Labor Today at www.labortoday.lowell.us. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?